Wife handed me a birthday card on a Tuesday morning, slid it across the kitchen counter like she was passing me a grocery receipt, and went back to scrolling her phone. I stood there holding it. The envelope wasn't even sealed properly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, not a card, just printer paper, and a $15 coupon for a hardware store I hadn't been to in 3 years. No signature, just the coupon. I was 41 years old. I remember looking at the back of her head and thinking, she didn't forget, she just didn't care enough to pretend. There's something about that distinction that takes a while to land. Forgotten would have hurt differently. Forgotten would have hurt differently. My bind means you slipped from someone's mind. But my wife hadn't forgotten. She'd made a decision. She'd stood in front of a printer, selected the coupon, folded the paper, found an envelope, and handed it to me. Every step of that was a choice. And every choice said the same thing. You don't matter enough for more than this. I poured my coffee. I didn't say anything. I took the envelope to the garage and set it on my workbench, and I stood there alone for a few minutes looking at the coupon. $15. Hardware store. Already expired. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context. I met my wife when I was 26. She was a paralegal at a firm downtown, sharp and quick, and the kind of woman who walked into a room already knowing where she was going to sit. I was running a small HVAC repair business out of a rented garage on the east side of the city, driving a truck that needed the passenger window manually held up with a piece of duct tape. She thought it was charming. I thought she was the most capable person I'd ever met. We got married 2 years later. I was still doing okay. Not great, but okay. Steady work, a few residential contracts, building something slowly. She made more than I did, which was fine. I wasn't the kind of man who needed to be the biggest earner in the room to feel like a man. But that changed, not suddenly. Gradually over years. The way a room gets cold when someone keeps the window cracked just a little. You don't notice it for a long time, and then one day you realize you've been shivering for months. The comments started small. Things like, "Are you sure that's the right approach?" And "I just think you could be more ambitious." Dinner table observations delivered lightly with a smile. Then they got heavier. My colleague just bought his second property. My friend's husband is making partner this year. I just wonder sometimes if you've thought about whether this is really what you want. I thought we were having conversations. I didn't understand for a long time that those weren't conversations. They were verdicts. She'd decided what I was. She just kept restating it until I believed it too. Our son was 9 by then. Good kid, serious, thoughtful, already better at math than I'd ever been. He had his mother's sharpness, and I hoped some of my patience. He watched the two of us the way children do, quietly, absorbing more than either of us knew. Her name was Joanne. His name is Theo. Those are the two people my whole story is about. The year before the birthday coupon, I'd started something I hadn't told my wife about. It wasn't deception. Not at first. It was just mine. I've always worked better in silence. I grew up in a house where you didn't announce things before they were real, because announcing things before they were real just gave people something to take from you. So when I started developing an idea I'd been sitting with for 3 years, I didn't mention it. The idea was a diagnostic software platform for small HVAC contractors, the kind of businesses like mine that couldn't afford the enterprise-level tools the big commercial outfits used. I'd spent 15 years watching guys like me make expensive mistakes because we were estimating instead of diagnosing, guessing instead of knowing. I taught myself to code badly in my 30s, took some online courses, got better, started building something. By the time I was 40, I had a working prototype and 2 small contractors using it. Joanne didn't know any of this. Not because I hid it, because she'd stopped asking about my work years ago. She'd categorized it, small, unambitious, not worth her attention, and filed it away. When you've been categorized, you stop offering updates. I kept building. I kept it simple. I kept my mouth shut. The birthday coupon was in March. By August, I had 12 paying clients on the platform. Small contractors, mostly, but paying. Real money. Not enough to change anything yet, but real. Joanne, that same August, started coming home late. Not every night. 2 or 3 times a week. Always with a reason. Depositions running long, a client dinner, drinks with colleagues. I didn't interrogate her. I noticed the way you notice the window is cracked, and I stored it, and I waited. Theo noticed too. He didn't say anything to me about it directly, but one night I was helping him with a school project in the kitchen. Something about local ecosystems. I remember he was very particular about getting the native species list right, and he looked up from his paper and said, "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" I was quiet for a second. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. 9-year-old shrug. The kind that means I know more than I'm saying. "She seems like she's somewhere else," he said. "Even when she's here." I looked at my kid. Smart, perceptive, didn't miss a thing. I thought, he deserves honesty but not burden. "We're working through some things," I said. "That's what adults do. Nothing for you to carry." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Went back to his native species list. I watched him write for a while and felt something settle in my chest. Not sadness exactly, but the weight of knowing something you can't unknow. I found out in October. I'm not going to detail how, because the how doesn't matter. What matters is that I found out, and I found out the who, and the who was a man named Stewart Price. Stewart Price was a senior partner at Joanne's firm. 52 years old, second marriage. Drove a car that cost more than I'd made in my best year. He had a reputation in their professional circle. A man who collected things he considered impressive, which apparently included my wife. Here's what I did when I found out. Nothing. Not immediately. I closed the laptop, sat in the garage for an hour with the lights off, and then I went inside and made dinner. I'm a slow processor. I've always been that way. Other men might have reacted with fire. I reacted the way water does. I went still, and I went deep, and I let things settle. I didn't confront Joanne. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. Instead, I called a developer I'd been working with. A young woman named Rosa I'd met through a contractor friend. Brilliant. Underpaid at her corporate job. Looking for something to believe in. I told her I wanted to accelerate the platform build. I told her I thought we were 6 months from something real. She asked why the urgency. I said, "I've recently had some clarity about what I'm building toward." She laughed. She didn't know what I meant. That was fine. I should tell you about Stewart Price's company. Not his firm. His other investment. The one he was proud of. About 4 years prior, Stewart had been a co-founder and primary investor in a commercial HVAC management company called Meridian Systems. It served mid-sized commercial clients. Office parks, medical facilities, that kind of operation. Mid-tier. Not huge, but established. He'd funded most of it, sat on the board, talked about it at dinner parties. I'd later learn, like it was a monument to his foresight. I'd known about Meridian for 2 years before I knew about Stewart. I'd known about them because they were the kind of company my platform was built to compete with. Not directly. They served bigger clients. I served smaller contractors. But adjacent, I'd watched their growth, studied their structure, noticed when things started slowing down. In the fall of the year of the birthday coupon, Meridian was struggling. I knew because, in our industry, you know these things. Key engineers had left. Their subscription retention was down. They'd made an aggressive expansion that hadn't landed. The market positioning was soft. I also knew because I'd been quietly talking to their largest departing client for 3 months. I want to be careful how I say this next part. I wasn't planning anything calculated when I started those conversations. I was doing what I always do, talking to people in the industry, listening, building relationships, following where the work led. The strategy came together later, slowly, the way my best decisions always have. By November, I had a meeting with 2 private investors Rosa had connected me to. By December, I had a formal offer drafted. I was going to acquire Meridian Systems. Let me tell you what I didn't do during all of this. I didn't tell Joanne. She had told a colleague. That same December, at what she thought was a private lunch, that she was finally figuring out what she actually wanted from her life. Her colleague mentioned this to a mutual friend. The mutual friend mentioned it to me gently, the way people deliver these things, wrapped in concern, bleeding through at the edges. I thanked him. I went home. I made Theo's lunch for the next week. Turkey and mustard, an apple, whatever. Chips he was into that month. I coached his weekend soccer practice. I helped him build a papier-mâché model of the Chesapeake Bay watershed for extra credit. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. If Joanne noticed I was calm, she didn't mention it. I think she'd written off my calm as defeat. She'd mistaken my silence for surrender for so long that she'd stopped checking whether the ground had shifted under her. The ground had shifted. The acquisition finalized in February. 14 months after the birthday coupon, I owned Meridian Systems, restructured, renamed, folded into the platform I'd spent 3 years building in my garage. The combined entity had 47 commercial clients, a real engineering team, and this is the part I still think about, 2 board seats, one of which I held. Stewart Price's investment had been bought out as part of the acquisition. He didn't know initially who had bought it. The transaction went through a holding company Rosa and I had set up 18 months prior, and the name on the paperwork wasn't mine. I waited until after the closing to introduce myself. That meeting deserves its own paragraph. I walked into the offices of his firm. Not the HVAC company, his law firm. I had a meeting with him that had been framed, by my attorney, as a consultation about the acquisition's legal transition. He came into the conference room with 2 associates and a look on his face that I recognized. The look of a man who's decided already what he thinks of you. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was a nobody. The husband of a woman he'd spent a year treating like a prize he'd earned. I introduced myself. I watched the recognition move across his face like weather. First the name didn't land, then it did, and then the arithmetic started happening behind his eyes. "You're Joanne's husband," he said. "I am," I said. "And I'm also the majority owner of the company you just sold your stake in." I don't believe in dramatic pauses for effect. I'm not a theatrical man. But I will tell you that I did not rush that sentence. I let it sit in the room. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I wanted to introduce myself in person," I said, "because I believe in doing business like a human being. The transition team will be in touch with you about the final paperwork. I don't anticipate any complications." I stood up. I shook his hand. I stood up. I shook his hand. I left. I filed for divorce in March. Joanne was served at the firm. I didn't choose that for theater. It was where she was when the process server found her. But she called me that evening, and her voice had a quality in it I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Something thinner. "You knew," she said. I didn't answer that right away. "You've known for how long?" "Long enough," I said. "The company is a business decision," I said, "not a personal one." I separated them. "Did you?" "Yes," I said. "I did. Whatever is happening between us has nothing to do with the business, and whatever happens with the business will not be used as a weapon. I need you to believe that." She was quiet. "I need to know about Theo," she said finally. "Theo is my son," I said. "He will always have both his parents. That's not negotiable, and it's not something you have to earn. But how involved you are day to day is something we're going to work out like adults, and I'm going to need you to actually show up for those conversations." She said, "Okay." That was the most honest conversation we'd had in 3 years. Theo found out we were separating on a Saturday morning. I told him myself before Joanne came to talk to him. I wanted him to hear it from me first, not because I wanted control of the narrative, but because I knew he deserved someone who would sit still with him while he processed it. We were eating breakfast. I'd made pancakes, because that's what I make when I don't know what else to do. He was eating quietly, and I turned off the stove and sat down across from him and said, "I need to tell you something important, and I want you to ask me anything you want." He put down his fork. I told him, not everything. He was 10, but the true shape of it. That his mom and I weren't going to be together anymore. That it wasn't his fault, which I said twice because it needed to be said twice. That he was going to have 2 homes, and both of them were going to have him in them as much as possible. That the hardest part would be the beginning, and that was okay. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Did you know it was coming?" "Yes," I said. "For how long?" "A while." He thought about that. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because there was nothing to say yet," I said. "I was working on it." He picked up his fork again, ate a bite of pancake, then said, very quietly, "I saw the thing about Meridian Systems on your laptop when I was looking for the charger." I looked at my kid. "I didn't understand all of it," he said, "but I understand some of it." I nodded slowly. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. And I said what I meant. We're already okay. The rest is just time. The divorce took 8 months. I won't dress it up as painless. I won't dress it up as painless. It wasn't. Joanne had retained a sharp attorney, and there were months of back and forth that ground me down in ways I hadn't anticipated. She claimed at one point partial interest in the platform on the grounds that I had developed it during the marriage. My attorney pushed back. It went to mediation. It resolved. Stewart Price and Joanne separated quietly around the same time. I don't know the details, and I didn't ask. I heard it secondhand, the way you hear most things about a chapter of your life you've already closed. He resigned from the board of the commercial clients he'd held. His firm went through a difficult period that had nothing to do with me. A separate malpractice situation that had been building for a year before I entered the picture. I want to be clear about that because I'm not interested in claiming credit for things I didn't cause. What I did cause was this. I built something real. I built it quietly, without permission or applause, during years when the person who was supposed to be my partner had decided I was already written off. I built it in a garage with bad lighting and a workbench I'd had since I was 28. While my wife was somewhere else and my son was asleep and the house was quiet, and I was the only one who still believed anything was possible. That belief, it turns out, was the only one who still believed anything was possible. That belief, it turns out, was the only capital I ever needed. 2 years after the divorce finalized, I was at Theo's spring soccer game. He'd made the travel team, something he'd worked toward all season with a focus that made me proud, in a way I couldn't articulate without getting embarrassingly emotional about it. He was playing defense. He was good. He had this particular way of reading where the play was going before it arrived that reminded me of the way he'd looked at the world as a small child, always 3 steps ahead, always watching. After the game, he came off the field and found me at the sideline. He was sweaty and grinning, and he said, "Did you see that clearance in the second half?" I told him I'd seen it. I told him it was excellent. He drank half a water bottle, thought for a second, then said, "Dad, my history teacher asked what our parents do for work." I said, "You built a company." I raised an eyebrow. "She asked if it was a small business," he said. I told her it wasn't small anymore. He said it without pride exactly, more like a statement of fact, the way he always delivered things that mattered to him. And then he turned back toward the field because some of his teammates were calling him over, and I stood at the sideline with my hands in my jacket pockets and felt the weight of the last few years move through me and out. Not gone. I don't think these things go entirely, but lighter, bearable, mine. The coupon is still in the garage. Still on the workbench. I kept it because I'm the kind of man who keeps things that mean something, and it means something to me. Not as a wound, not as a trophy. More like a timestamp. A record of where I was standing when I decided to stop waiting for someone else to tell me what I was worth. My wife had handed me a folded piece of paper on a Tuesday morning and slid it across the counter like a receipt. She'd meant it as a verdict. I turned it into a starting point. That's the only revenge I ever wanted. Not to watch anyone suffer. Not to arrange some theatrical confrontation that I could replay for satisfaction later. Just to become so thoroughly, undeniably myself, to build something so genuinely real that the coupon became not a symbol of my smallness but of my beginning. You decide what things mean. That's the part no one can take from you. I'm 43 now. The platform serves over 200 small contractors across 11 states. Theo is 12 and reading at a high school level, and still terrible at remembering to put his dishes in the dishwasher. My garage still has bad lighting. I still get there before anyone else does in the morning. I still drink my coffee standing up at the workbench. And sometimes I look at that expired coupon and I feel not vindicated, that's not quite right. I feel clarified, like a man who knows exactly who he is and how he got here and would not change a single step of the path. Not even the hard ones. Not even the Tuesday morning with the printer paper and the expired coupon in the back of my wife's head. Especially not that. Because that Tuesday morning is when I finally got serious. And serious, it turns out, was all I ever needed to be. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in those 2 years, and I keep coming back to the same thing. Nobody was punished by me. They were undone by the logic of their own choices. Joanne decided who I was early, and stopped looking. That decision cost her everything. Not because I arranged it that way, but because when you stop paying attention to someone, you lose the ability to predict them. You think you're watching a man stand still, and meanwhile he's been moving the whole time. Her certainty about my smallness was the very thing that made her blind to what I was building. She couldn't see it because she'd already decided there was nothing to see. Stewart built something real with Meridian. I'll give him that. But he built it the way certain men build things. As a display, something to impress rooms with, to talk about at dinner, to use as evidence of his own importance. He stopped tending it when it stopped impressing people. A business that exists to serve its owner's ego is always fragile at the foundation. I didn't take Meridian from him. He'd already let it drift. I just showed up when the water was low. And Rosa, I want to say something about Rosa, because people always focus on the conflict in a story like this and miss the part that actually mattered. She was 28, underpaid, working for a company that didn't see what she was capable of. She took a risk on a 41-year-old HVAC guy with a half-built software platform and a theory. That's the part of this story I'm proudest of. Not buying a company, not the meeting in the conference room, But the fact that I gave someone like Rosa a place to do real work, that's what I actually built. The rest was just sequence. What I know now, that I didn't fully know then, is this. Character is not a thing you perform in good conditions. It's what you do in the years when no one believes in you and nothing is going your way, and the person who is supposed to be in your corner has already written your obituary. Those are the years that build you or break you, and the difference isn't talent, it's the decision to keep going when going feels pointless. Theo saw me keep going. He filed it away. He's 12 now, and already the kind of kid who doesn't quit things when they get hard, and I am absolutely certain he didn't get that from a speech I gave him. He got it from watching me at the workbench, lights on, long after everyone else had gone to sleep. That's the inheritance I care about, not the platform, not the clients, not any of it. The thing I most want Theo to take from these years is that you don't need permission to become something. You don't need someone to believe in you first. You don't need the conditions to be right or the people around you to be fair. Fairness is lovely when you can get it, but it was never a prerequisite for the work. The coupon is still on the workbench. Expired. $15. Hardware store. It's the most honest thing my wife ever gave me.